Hello, everyone. Welcome back to People Jew Want to Know podcast. I'm your host, Margarita Lyadova, and today I'm bringing you an episode unlike anything you may have heard before on a podcast, a night at the opera. And what do I mean by that? Our guest today is literally an opera singer who will be performing some amazing pieces from her Jewish repertoire, accompanied by a pianist. The pianist is Allegra Chapman. You find me another Jewish podcast that's doing that. I tried to get really creative with this and bring you something unique, so you let me know what you think. Today's guest is Sara LeMesh. Sara will tell you a little bit more about herself, but here are some things worth calling out in her bio. Sara is a soprano, hailed by the San Francisco Chronicle for her powerhouse performance of vocal majesty and expressive translucency. She has a dramatic presence on the opera stage. She's an avid chamber musician and an advocate of contemporary music. Sara has won countless prizes and competitions for her talents and has performed all over the world. She has played many roles in famous operas like Don Pasquale, Breaking the Waves, Carmen, and Frida. In 2024, she will also play a role in Puccini's Madama Butterfly, which I have been dying to see, so hopefully I will get to see that opera sometime soon. Whatever I read you in her bio won't do justice to how impressive Sara truly is. It's such a privilege to have her on and hear her perform for us. Her singing and performance is incredibly captivating, and you will get to hear 4 songs from Sara. In addition to her performances, you'll hear Sara talk about her background and career path, which took many interesting turns and twists throughout. She'll also talk about Jewish music specifically. Aside from the fact that this is just a musically phenomenal episode, it's also an educational one. So without further ado, please enjoy. Hi, Sara. Thank you so much for joining me on People Jew Want to Know podcast. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me.
It's such a treat. This is the first of its kind when it comes to podcast episodes because we will be hearing some opera. So without further ado, my first question for you in light of this, tell us about yourself. What do you do and how did you get there?
Yeah, so I am, as you said, an opera singer. I'm based in New York City in the East Village, but I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area in California. And I studied singing from a very young age. I was very precocious and asked my parents essentially for lessons after being inspired by a particular Celine Dion, Andrea Bocelli collaboration that they did. And I essentially, long story short, started voice lessons when I was 8, which is quite young, but it was focused on what we call ear training. So training pitch abilities to recognize pitch and cultivating relatives' pitch skills. And then I studied piano when I was 9, and the rest was really history. I fell in love with music as a form of expression and as a way to indulge my academic interests with kind of music history and theory, and rather quickly at a young age realized opera would be a good trajectory based on feedback from some teachers who had essentially told my parents, who are not musical, hey, she has an opera voice, not musical theater. You should go down that road. And here we are.
That's amazing. And something that's special about your work is you have a whole repertoire dedicated to Jewish music. How did you get into singing Jewish music? How do you pick the pieces? I know you've done events where you performed a whole set of songs that have like Israeli and Yiddish influence. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so I think a good place to start would be to give people a little bit more information about my background, which in terms of classical music instruction is pretty traditional. I went to Rice University for my undergraduate work and studied classical voice, and then pursued a master's degree at Bard College Conservatory of Music, which is just upstate in the Hudson Valley, about an hour and a half north on Amtrak. And I was always very interested in song in addition to opera. So I loved doing recitals and I loved putting on concerts. And from a very young age, I would volunteer in nursing homes. And as I got older, that turned into rehab facilities and prisons to do outreach recitals. And I loved the intimacy and connection that fostered. But my journey to wanting to share my Jewishness and my identity, my spirituality with others really came later in life. And it's a longer story, but it has to do with being in a very Western tradition of music that's very focused on French and German and Italian repertoire. And in my later 20s, really having this itch to share who I am rather than simply singing works that represent other people's cultures and identities, as much as I love to do that. So I had sung Yiddish as a child, and I sang a lot at my synagogue with my cantor, who's a flutist, pianist, and singer. He's pretty much a prodigy and a musical savant. So he would throw a ton of repertoire at me as a kid, but I returned to it, and especially during COVID, felt a pull to explore that repertoire and felt like the industry that I was in the midst of a collapse. And in many ways, it is still very much recovering, but I decided to apply to cantorial school, and I lived in Jerusalem for a year from 2021 to 22, where I really felt I didn't like my school but I loved Israel. I loved participating in my musicology coursework and going to concerts and meeting Israeli musicians and singers, and realized that I had to return to my classical career and bring that with me. So it really, a few years ago, deciding to be more public with my identity. A lot of people, especially in the opera world, even though there are many, many Jews in entertainment, opera is not Hollywood. It's not so much Aley or journalism in New York City. It's a very Eurocentric career. So, but I have found such positive reception among colleagues and people who go, I didn't even know this repertoire existed. How did I not even know that this existed, that this Spanish music is there, or that this Yiddish folk music is there that was influenced by German music? It's like, because it's Jews of the diaspora are part of the cultures in which they lived. So that's been fun to sort of educate the broader community through it. But that's the nutshell version. So I hope that sheds some light on my journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So are you like a cantor? Are you a licensed cantor? What does it mean to go to cantorial school? Are you able to do like weddings or services or something?
Yeah, it's a good question. I am not. I am what I call a cantorial school dropout, because I realized living in Israel that and I say that lovingly and jokingly, but it's true. I dropped out. And it's because I felt very connected to I grew up observant as a Reformed Jew, but, my dad was raised very, very conservative, and my mom was Reformed/atheist, but I kind of am a very interesting middle ground, I guess you could say. But I identified a lot with Israelis when I was there, that they, celebrate the holidays and Shabbat is a part of their life. But being Jewish is like asking a fish what water is. It's sort of just who they are, and it's a part of their life. And so I decided to not continue the path. It's a 5-year degree program, continue the path of becoming a religious leader, and that I wanted to be free on my own to perform and sing and bring Jewish music outside the synagogue to all kinds of people and communities. And that's where I find the most gratification. I think for a lot of, I work with kids and teach, chanting and Hebrew stuff, which I really enjoy. But the path of a religious leader, of a rabbi, of a cantor is a true calling. And it's a life of bringing music in sacred spaces, whereas I enjoy the freedom to be able to sing Yiddish in a concert hall to people, who really may not hear it ever, ever, ever. So that's kind of was my impetus. But going to school, there are very few Jewish music programs, very, very few. And almost all of them are affiliated with a seminary or a religious program. So I felt it was the right path for that moment in time.
If anything, I'd argue that sacredness that you learn studying in Israel, you get to bring into your work to people who don't already understand it or don't yet appreciate it. So it's more important actually to do that work than to try to compel people who are already agreeing with you and who get it already. So you're sharing that. Yeah, exactly. That's how I feel. And I think especially now in this time of tension and misinformation circulating constantly, that there's something very powerful about entering a room where, of course, my audiences for Jewish concerts may skew Jewish, but there's certainly people who have approached me who went, I don't know anything about this, but wow, I really want to learn more. And to showcase the diversity of our culture in and of itself is sort of my own little act of resistance, to say we're not a monolith and there's a plethora of views and perspectives. And just to have that exist, I think is very critical at this moment in time. Yeah, and I forget who said this, but I don't know. I'm never going to remember who this is, but it was like this idea that Jewish music is the only genre of music that is written in the major and minor keys at the same time. There's something also about Jewish music that I think is so distinct, and it's very special.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I could go on a lot about, yeah. I mean, that's the interesting thing, too, about when people ask, well, what is Jewish music? I mean, I saw a quote by Leonard Cohen, I believe, who's being interviewed. It's this clip on Instagram that went a little bit viral. And somebody said, well, would you consider your work to be Jewish? And he chuckled and said, well, I'm Jewish, so everything I make is Jewish because it's a part of me. So there's that perspective on Jewish music. What does it mean to make something born of your own experiences and that it's inherently a piece of you? But of course, there's the more academic, definitions of it, right? There's Ashkenazi and Sephardic and Mizrahi, and there are melodies and tunes associated with each of those individual cultures. We could be put on our little good student hat if we want to pretend we're in class getting graded. There are Jewish modes inherent in Ashkenazi music. And if you go to a synagogue, you'll hear the Fiddler on the Roof tune and the major tune for Adonai Malach notes. But to me, I like to think of it a little more existentially, that sure, it's definitely a tradition rich in harmonic variety, and it absorbs the traditions of the cultures to which it is adjacent. So Ladino music sounds Spanish because it is Spanish, because Jews in Spain were also Spanish. And just like Yiddish music, if you're Polish, I had a Polish couple come up to me after this concert in Princeton, New Jersey, and they said, oh my gosh, I loved it. We're Polish. We just love all that folk music. Because to them, that's shared musical heritage, right? Because Jews in Poland and Ukraine were listening and exposed to similar musical motifs and traditions. So anyways, I guess the shorter answer is that, or my interpretation, or something I could share with someone who's curious, is that Jewish music is whatever you make it to be as a Jewish person. We can leave it at that even.
On that note, pun intended, what will be the first song that you are performing for us tonight?
So the first song I'd like to perform is an excerpt called Oyfn Grinem Bergele, which is On the Green Hill, or On the Little Green Hill, by Mieczysław Weinberg, who was coincidentally a Polish Jew. So I'll say, there's a lot I could say about him, but I'll say that he was born in 1919 in Warsaw, and his father was a musician at a Jewish theater, and he was a pianist and studied piano from very young. And he had to flee multiple times throughout his young life, to continue composing and living freely. So he fled to Minsk in 1939, and then he started studying composition. Minsk Conservatory was evacuated in 1941, so he fled to Uzbekistan. And then he met a composer that classical music nerds may know, Dmitri Shostakovich, who was a close friend throughout his life and helped him get out, essentially. And he left for Moscow and lived his whole life in Moscow until 1996. So these songs, while they're commonly done in Yiddish, were also published in Russian, because there was this initiative in Russia at the time, in that time in history, to publish and help preserve Jewish folk music, which is a fact that people may be surprised to hear, that there was such an organized initiative, but given complex history of the region. But anyways, these songs are from a work called Jewish Songs, Opus 13, and the texts are by the Polish Jewish poet, that's a mouthful, Isaac Leib Peretz. And they contain a lot of, like we talked about, what are markers of Jewish music. These certainly contain markers of Yiddish music with lots of oompa bass lines and slurred notes. And it tells the story of the adventures of a young boy who, if you read through the poems, he's going through the hardships of war, and there are moments of brevity, and there are, of course, moments of great sorrow and pain.
So
This next piece is a Niggun. And if people don't know that term, it simply refers to a wordless melody, lie, lie, lie. And it was composed by Shalom, Kharitonov, and maybe his brother Aharon. We don't know for sure. They were Hasidic Jewish men of the Chabad legacy. And in case you never know, in case someone's listening and doesn't know what Hasidism is, it's a very mystical Jewish movement. So when we talk about niggunim or wordless melodies, we're thinking about this movement that is affiliated with Kabbalah that sought a very direct relationship with God. They believed that music and dance enabled one to achieve an almost euphoric state so that they could convene directly with Adonai, with Hashem, as they would say. So this Niggun represents that tradition. And Niggunim are considered a really fundamental part of Ashkenazi culture. And I love this quote. One Hasidic master said, Niggunim are the pen of the soul.
Wow, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for sharing these two songs with us. I know you have two more songs for us, so what's next?
Yeah, of course. It's my pleasure, and I could talk about this at length all day. So the next piece is a Ladino song. So I sort of alluded to the experience of Spanish Jews. So I want to say a little something about it. It's called Durme, Durme, or Sleep, Sleep, or Dream, Dream. And Ladino is also referred to as Judeo-Spanish. And it's a mix of 16th century Spanish. So we're not talking modern Spanish, right? If you speak fluent Spanish, there are some pronunciations that will be inevitably strange to you, I know. It mixes 16th century Spanish with Hebrew, Turkish, other languages. And again, it really does reflect that pre-16th century spoken Spanish, along with the influence of Hebrew. And it's been carried to its present day by descendants of Spanish Jews who were expelled from Spain after 1492. And it is sadly becoming extinct. I hate to even say those words out loud, but it is a language that is at risk of serious endangerment because most of the speakers are in their older years. Most of them also, to my knowledge, reside in Israel. So as they pass away, presumably because it's a spoken language, if it's not used, it will be lost. So I believe that music and art is a really wonderful way to preserve it. These folk songs were traditionally sung by women, often while doing housework without any accompanying singers or instruments. So just a cappella. And they have themes of love and loss and heroes. And some of them even sound very flamenco influenced. But yeah, this one is a very sweet lullaby. And the last song that I would love to leave you with is a song by Bracha Tzvira, who is a very special Israeli singer. She really is, in my opinion, a hidden gem. And she's really one of the first musicians, if not the first singer there, who her parents were Yemenite immigrants. They lived in Jerusalem, but she combined her folk song knowledge of music in Arabic and Hebrew and of Yemenite origin with Western musical idioms and sounds. And that was a completely new thing to do. She really forged an entirely new genre. She was born in Jerusalem, and her story is rather sad, although she overcame a lot. She was orphaned by both parents by the age of 3. So I think in many ways that enabled her to retain musical influences from many diverse areas, because she was apparently raised by a bunch of different Sephardic foster families in Jerusalem throughout her entire childhood. So she just absorbed all these different sounds. And when she was young, probably around 18, she moved to Berlin and tried briefly to become an actress. And she met a pianist who would become her husband. He was an impresario of sorts, meaning he put together concerts in Berlin. So they were an amazing pair. They toured Europe. They were very, very successful. And he would help her transcribe these Middle Eastern, Yemenite, and Israeli songs. And I think, with his help, because these are not songs that are traditionally done with piano. So the fact that they combined her very much Yemenite style of singing, if anyone's listening who's familiar with classical technique, it's more nasalized. If you want to look it up after this, it's sung with chest voice. She has an alto range, but that was not in vogue in Western Europe, certainly at that time. And people were accustomed to listening to Schubert and Schumann and Bach and Beethoven and Brahms. And I think she must have been incredibly intriguing to people. And I saw some pictures of her when she was touring Europe. People shared images of her and actually advertised that here's this dark-skinned, beautiful woman coming in from the East. And Jews in Berlin, even at the time, were like, who is this? I mean, I think there was probably mixed reception. We can't know for sure, although it's documented that there were Jews who were really intrigued and thinking about that, that time in the Zionist movement. She must have been infatuating to so many people and or potentially confusing, right? Because this was new music. But anyways, this piece, Aley Giv'ah, was written by the Hebrew poet Abraham Broidis, who was born in Vilnius, Lithuania, and he settled in Israel in 1923. And it's just a beautiful, simple poem that describes the landscape of Israel.
This has been a delight, and there's so much I learned about the diversity of Jewish music, because if you asked me before doing this what I knew about Jewish music, I didn't think that the Jews had a strong footprint in more opera style or classical style music in terms of singing. Maybe there are Jewish composers who wrote instrumental pieces. I definitely know the more modern artists, but this was a big learning experience for me to gain awareness about the songs that were written before even World War II, or, you said the oldest piece goes how far back?
Well, I believe it would have to be by default the Ladino piece because it was written in pre-Jewish expulsion from Spain. So we're talking probably 1400s.
Yeah, these are really old pieces.
So that one, certainly medieval, and it would certainly be the most historical piece, you could say.
Amazing. And something that I want to ask you is, you have an interesting perspective working in the music community. And for a lot of people, they're probably hearing your repertoire and it's new to them, because even I, as a person who's very involved in Jewish life, didn't know about this type of music. What do you want Jewish people to hear right now?
And I thought about this potential question, and I think I'll share something that I've been telling myself, especially in light of October 7th, but also beyond, just as an artist in the musical community. I think I'd like to share that Jewish people deserve to be seen in all of their complexity. I think that we need to highlight the diversity of Jewish experiences, and that there is no, and I think about this a lot in the context of art, right? There are certain musical, right? Fiddler on the Roof is a great example. And that was really powerful even within the Jewish community to see representation or to go to Yiddish theater at that time in history. But that is one piece, right? Ashkenazi Judaism is one piece of our experience, right? And I would encourage people, Jews who come from interfaith families, Jews who are in, marriages with somebody who is of a different background, that it doesn't diminish your experience and that it enriches it. You are making the fabric of the Jewish experience varied and colorful and beautiful, and that you deserve to be seen in that in whatever way you choose, but that the diversity of your experience is critical.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And as we wrap here, I have to ask, what's the best way to connect with you, and how can people learn of your upcoming concerts or performances?
So the best way would probably be Instagram, because I do post there, even if it's just a picture of me walking my dog, daily. So that's at Sara, Sara.LeMesh, LEM, like Mary, ESH. I'm also on Facebook. I have a musicians page / Sara LeMesh Soprano, and my website is also updated with upcoming events and engagements, and I'll be doing a bunch of stuff in New York and then in Vermont, and then if anyone's in the Chicago area, I'll be singing there actually quite a bit through 2025. But that's just my name, Sara, SaraLeMesh.com.
A side tangent. What is the origin of your last name?
Ooh, that is a tangent. So the capital M is not... And probably Jews will find this fascinating, because I think a lot of Jews have stories like this of changing the name. It's a made-up name. But the capital M is something that I added. A very famous agent that I encountered in graduate school. I used to be fluent in French. It's rusty now. And she said, well, you speak French. Why don't you capitalize the M? LeMesh. C'est mieux. C'est mieux comme ça. It's better like that. I thought, okay, I did it sort of to try on, and it stuck. And I've stuck with it. So that's pretty hilarious that's been my spelling for the past 10 years. But I'm Romanian. Almost my entire family is Romanian. And according to my dad, who did extensive research on this when I was in high school, our name was Solomon, but it was changed to LeMesh. My family in Romania, in Bucharest, were musicians and conductors and violinists 200, 300 years ago. Very little record that we can find about them, although there is some. And they decided, even at that time, it was changed way, way pre the 20th century, but they borrowed the name from a Hungarian violinist. The tale goes, according to my dad, whose name was Nemes, which is sort of Hungarian sounding, and they adopted it, and it stuck, and it has remained in the family. But it feels fitting that all these years later, I'm pursuing a career as an artist, and I have the same stage name that they had.
Interestingly, my last name is also made up. It was changed, by my great-grandfather, who had a very Jewish name, Solomon Berdichevsky. He wanted
Solomon
to serve in the Soviet Union in the army, and so they said, you're not going to serve or amount to anything with that name. So he changed his first and last name, and his last name he changed to Lidov. But interestingly, this is my great-grandfather on my grandma's side. Mm-hmm. So when my grandfather married my grandmother, his last name was Gesundterman. And my great-grandfather was like, my daughter is not taking on that last name. So my grandfather is literally also Lyadov because he took my grandma's name. So I would have been Margarita Gesundterman if none of this happened, which is kind of funny because that is not a pretty sounding name. Margarita Gesundterman.
Listen, there's all kinds of names out there. You have a similar story then.
Yeah. But in closing here, I want to ask you the question that I ask every single guest. Who would you like to nominate for People Jew Want to Know podcast?
So I would love to nominate somebody who was a mentor of mine in Jerusalem, Cantor Evan Kent. He is a real special person. He trained as an opera singer at the Manhattan School of Music, just near Columbia on the Upper West Side. And he decided, I don't want to share his story because he can certainly do that much better than me, but he went to cantorial school, and right after he met his now husband, who's a rabbi, and they're both based in Tel Aviv, but Evan, he worked for many years at a synagogue in Los Angeles, and now he has been touring synagogues in the U.S. with his one-man show. He created an amazing puppet and wrote all this music to tell his story. And I just love him, and I love his creative energy, and I love his perspective on being a Jew in the diaspora and in Israel. And him and his husband also work part-time at a synagogue in Milan, Italy, that I got to visit a couple of years ago for Pesach. And I think just his knowledge on Jews of Northern Italy is incredible. He's an interesting person and a lovely human being.
Thank you so much for this nomination. And I have to tell you, thank you so much for doing this podcast. You truly are a remarkable Jewish person. This has been a one-of-a-kind episode and such a treat. So thanks again.
Thank you.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, please go ahead and rate us 5 stars. Be the first to hear our episodes by subscribing to People Jew Want to Know wherever you get your podcasts. And for exclusive content, follow us on Instagram at People Jew Want to Know.